Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the Business Utility Subcommittee. Today is Tuesday, February the 6th, 2024. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, if you can take the roll, please.
Representative Alexander, Representative Burkhart, Clemens, Freeman, Hale, Holsclaw, Johnson, Marsh, Thompson, Vaughn, Vital, Zachary, Chairman. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Members, before we get started today, does anybody have a personal order? Representative Hale, you're recognized.
I would like to welcome a constituent I see sitting out here in the crowd today, Mr. Cason Swan. Thank him for being here today.
Welcome, Mr. Cason. Members, any other members have a personal order? If not, we do have a calendar today, and first up is item number 1. That's House Bill 1702 by Chairman Ryan Williams. You're recognized. We have a motion. We have a second. Sponsor, you're recognized on your bill.
Thank you, Chairman members. This bill looks like a caption bill, but it does what it says it does. Years ago. Did you hear any of that?
And no, start over, please.
Okay, so I'm new to this committee, so my apologies. This bill looks like a caption bill. It's a go bill. It's actually the second time around for this bill. It just reauthorizes a current policy that we currently have in place. As many of the members know, not every student that graduates from high school in Tennessee is somebody that wants to go to college. What happened years ago is we established what is a nonprofit called Go Build. What this nonprofit does, it establishes an opportunity to communicate with high school students so that they can understand and know better about career and technical education jobs, with the idea that they can find out what those people make, and whether it's a pipe fitter, plumber, somebody that operates equipment. All this allows the reauthorization of that nonprofit and the partnership they have with the contractors and builders here in our community. I'm happy to answer any questions members might have.
Thank you, Chairman Williams, for that explanation. And it looks like Chairman Clemens is first up. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Chairman. This is just extending the Go Build Act 5 years. Is that right? Is it pretty much that straightforward?
Yes, sir.
So, thanks.
All right. Members of the committee, you've heard his explanation. Do we have any other questions for him? Seems pretty straightforward. Members, we are voting to send House Bill 1702 to full commerce. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The ayes have it. Sir, your bill is on its way to full commerce. Congratulations.
Thank you, Chairman members.
And now I've got to hand this off to Chairman Vaughn because the next item is my bill.
It's a non-recurring appropriation. That's weird. Are you a member of the apartment board? Having their reception tonight?
I'm not on the board, but
You're a member of the section.
all righty. Item number 2 on our calendar is House Bill 2108 by Chairman Boyd. Chairman Boyd, do we have a motion? Motion. And a second. Thank you. You're now in good posture there. Chairman Boyd, would you care to share with us what's going on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, all this bill does, House Bill 2108, is it takes the bill that I did last year. We defined clean and we defined renewable on 2 separate lists last year in Tennessee, and this just combines it into one list. It's really that simple, Mr. Chairman.
So this technically is a straightforward streamlining bill. Was that fair to assess it that way?
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't think of any better way to describe it than that.
Man, if we can cut 2 lists into one, that's a day's work. Do we have any question for the sponsor? Oh. Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill that you talked about last year that you passed, was that, I vaguely remember that. Can you remind us what that bill was last year and what that did that we're streamlining here?
Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Tennessee had never defined in statute what we thought of as clean and renewable energy. And I went to the Legislative Energy Horizon Institute and realized that was something we had never done. So I came back and I just compiled a list of different types of clean and renewable energy that we would recognize in statute. And that's all it is. And at the time, everyone told me that most states just have one list, and I was just so fresh out of that Legislative Energy Horizon Institute that I was nerding out on it, and I put it into two lists. And after it's settled and been signed into law, I realized that it really did need to be one list.
Surely there's a follow-up, Chairman Clemens?
I'm sorry, it's early in the session, and I just vaguely remember that bill being somewhat controversial, and I'm trying to get my head around it. And is this the bill that limited the local government's ability to classify these sections?
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you think it was controversial, I think you're thinking of another bill. This sailed right through. I think everybody loved it. And even my colleague from Davidson County asked me to make a minor change, and then he got behind it. So it's just an incredible bill that that defines clean and renewable energy, kind of the volunteer state standard for that.
Well, if somebody from Davidson County thought it was a good idea, then it must have been a good bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If we see, obviously, I can't believe nobody's commented on the fact that Chairman Boyd is obviously padding his stats on how many bills he can get passed. He passed one bill, then another bill, and now he's passing a bill to take those two bills and make them one bill. Congratulations, Chairman Boyd. You're way smarter than me. Wish I'd have thought of it. All right.
Is that one bill or three bills?
Well, he turned one into three.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
That's a day's work. That's what the people of the great state of Tennessee are getting. So I have heard a question. I see no more questions. So all those in favor of passing House Bill 2108 on to full commerce, please say yes. Or aye, that was an option. All those no? Hearing none. Here is your gavel and your list, Chairman Boyd. Congratulations on another stellar piece of legislation.
Thank you, Chairman Vaughn. Members, that concludes our calendar. So I promised y'all that we would have a great presentation. And so we have with us today, Mr. Ross Colonna, who's the Assistant Director of Local Government Finance. And I want to tell y'all that last year, one of the things that Chairman Vaughn and I worked on, for those of you who don't know, utilities that are public or government are regulated by the Comptroller's Office. And so last year, we did a complete total rebuild of that organization in collaboration with the Comptroller's Office. And so Mr. Colonna is with us today. We're going to go out of session and hear from him, and he's going to give us an update on that. So without objection, we're going out of session. And then, Ross, if you don't mind, just make sure your microphone is turned on and state your name for the record, please.
All right, everyone. My name is Ross Colonna. I'm the Assistant Director of Local Government Finance with the Comptroller's Office. I do have a presentation. Do I need to pull that up, or?
And members, that's on the dashboard if you want to follow along, but we would like to get you to pull it up, Ross, if we can.
Sure. Cool. All right, thank you. So as Chairman Boyd was saying, last year there was a huge legislative change as to how our office, dealt with the way that we regulate utilities. When I say utilities, it's exclusive to water, sewer, and natural gas public utilities in Tennessee. And whenever Chairman Boyd called me to ask me if I could come speak to this, I was delighted. Because I asked him, how long-ish are we talking here? Because last time I was in front of this body talking, I was up here for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and hopefully we're not going to run that long this time. Hopefully we're just going to be short 10, 15 minutes, but that's up to y'all. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all got, and I'm going to do my best on that. So this is what we're going to talk about today. The T-Board, Tennessee Board of Utility Regulation, what it's composed of, and then I'm going to talk about a few things that we do. Administrative review of utilities. We deal with customer complaints. We expanded that authority last year. Water loss, financial distress, mergers, which is always a fun topic to talk about with local governments, and the Utility Revitalization Fund. So the Tennessee Board of Utility Regulation, it was previously the Water and Wastewater Financing Board, which was about 280 utilities that were municipal, county, and authority systems that were water and sewer. Then we had the Utility Management Review Board, which was about 170 utility districts, and those were water, sewer, and natural gas. So Tennessee, I will say, for those of you that aren't familiar, we're really unique in how we regulate the utilities this way. If you look at surrounding states or states across the country, there's really not a board like this that I've seen that I'm aware of. And I think that is a large reason as why we have some of the strongest utilities in Tennessee, because we take the regulation of these utilities very seriously. So who is on the board? This is an 11-member board. There are 5 appointees that aren't by the governor, and then 6 governor appointees. So first we have Greg Moody. He's the chair. He's the comptroller designee. He serves as the director of our office and state assessed properties. We have Tom Moss. He's with TDEC. He's the TDEC designee. He serves as our vice chair. And he actually sent me a text yesterday, I believe, that this is 15th year serving on one of these boards. So he's got a lot of that historical knowledge of how these boards operate. We have Edwin Carter. He's a comptroller appointee. He's one of our state auditors, been with our office for a good while. Steve Stone, he's with Middle Tennessee Natural Gas Utility District. He's one of the governing body members, and then he was appointed by the House Speaker. And David Perkey from Morristown Utility Systems, and he's the Senate Speaker appointee. So now the governor appointees. So we have these pretty much all serve as management of the utility that they're associated with the exception of Mr. Eugene Hampton. We have Candace Vanisdale out of Harriman, Mike Adams out of Water Authority, Dixon County, Bruce Giles out of First Utility District in Knox, Eugene Hampton, he's with Metro Nashville, Nick Newman with Memphis Light Gas and Water, and Anthony Pelham, Warren County Utility District. And all of those, with the exception of Ms. Vanisdale, served on one of the prior boards as well for some time. So they have a lot of experience from that as well. So what do we regulate? About 454 water, sewer, and natural gas utilities. These are municipal systems like cities and towns. These are counties, utility districts, authorities, and authorities are generally energy authorities or water and sewer treatment authorities. Two things that I want to note here. We don't touch power. We have nothing to do with electric and power or anything like that. We're strictly water, sewer, and natural gas. And one thing that the bill did last year that it somewhat expanded the authority is we didn't have oversight over municipal gas systems or county gas systems or authority gas systems. And so this bill brought equality between the WWFB and UMRB because we oversaw gas utility districts, but not gas on the other side. And we didn't think that it really made sense that no one was overseeing the finances for these gas utilities, regardless of the ownership of them. So now we have administrative review cases. These were previously called board investigations, and we kind of had to rename them because when people hear the word investigation, the comptroller's office, they think our fraud, waste, and abuse, the division of investigations. And this is extremely far from that. Instead, what we were investigating is the financial, managerial, and technical capabilities of a utility. So people heard the word investigation, they clam up, they didn't really want to talk to us. So we had to kind of rebrand it, and we just place a utility and said administrative review. You can see that we have 11 open cases. Mostly those were carryovers from the previous boards. But we only open these instances of something like severe noncompliance with state statute. Often TDEC has significant issues with the utility. Another thing that our board has to do is if a report is released from our division of investigations about a utility, if there was fraud occurring or some sort of waste or abuse, we bring that in front of the TBOR to present what the findings were from our division of investigations. And if the TBOR finds that those are so significant, they don't feel that the problems have been solved, even after the release of our report, the TBOR can direct us as board staff to get involved to try to see if there's anything that we can do to help correct the problems that were found in our investigative report. So now customer complaints. This was a big change that occurred with last year's legislation. So previously, the Utility Management Review Board, which is the one that oversaw the utility districts, there was customer complaint jurisdiction. But I will say that it was fairly limited in scope, and it was somewhat difficult to understand what our actual authority was. So this bill not only clarified what our authority is when it comes to customer complaints, it also expanded it to where we can now hear customer complaints from cities and towns and counties and authorities, which we think is very important. One of the things that I hear all the time from customers that call our office is, we're dealing with a government monopoly here, right? The utility is essentially a monopoly that's allowed to run And sometimes the only recourse that they had was to go to the city council and hope that the city council would grant them some sort of remedy in a situation that they're having. And really the only recourse they had, if they didn't like the city councils or the county commission, whoever it may be, if they didn't like the decision, generally a lawsuit was really the only way that there was able to go after that. There was no governing body to kind of hear these complaints for them to appeal to before that they had to rely on the court. However, for utility districts, it did exist. So this bill expanded it to where if you're, it doesn't matter what kind of what kind of utility you are under our board, if there's a customer complaint, we can hear that complaint. There's a few steps first. We first have to ensure that it's heard at the local level, right? We don't want someone skipping city council, utility district governing body and just coming straight to us, because if they're willing to deal with it locally, there's no reason for us to get involved. We get the complaint first. It's not like there's if a complaint comes in, it goes immediately to the board. It comes to us and we determine if we have, one, the jurisdiction, or two, if there's an actually an issue. Because sometimes, we do get very disgruntled customers that there's really no recourse in the action because the utility was acting properly. So just because there's a complaint, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's in front of our board. So then if we believe that the case should come in front of the board, we request that the complainant and the utility come in front of our board to essentially bring the complaint and the defense, and then the T-board can order some corrective actions. Since the board was pretty much created after the bill was passed last year, we actually had one customer complaint at our meeting in November, and we were able to resolve that. And in this instance, it was in favor of the complainant. But moving on, what can we hear complaints about? So, this list right here, I feel, is fairly encompassing about what customers generally have complaints over. And, I will say the law goes in a little bit more detail. I'm just giving a brief summary here. But this really delineated what we're able to hear, because again, as I said, it was kind of confusing as to what the UMRB could hear to begin with. So we can hear justness and reasonableness of rates and fees. If y'all know utilities, generally speaking, the rates are what the customers get the most mad about, right? How much they're having to spend on a bill. And so in Tennessee, the rates have to be, according to the code, they have to be, quote, reasonable and justifiable. What does that mean? Well, the math has to make sense because there's no politics involved in rates. There's just math. You just have to make sure that your revenues are there to cover your expenses. So if we believe that rates are unjust or unreasonable, we can order a third party to come, or we can order the utility to contract with a third party to verify that the math is correct. What they're charging to customers does indeed make sense. Utility requirement of a customer to build infrastructure. So if someone wants to, build a business or even a home, and the utility comes back and says, yeah, you can, but you're going to have to build a pumping station right here or expand the size of this line. If the utility believes they're being treated unfairly, they can appeal that to our board for us to look at the facts of the matter. Failure to adopt policies and rules, or also the inadequacy of policies and rules. I think that one speaks for itself. And then the failure to extend service. So the failure to extend service, we occasionally see utilities that refuse to, extend a water line to serve a neighborhood, or extend a sewer line to, serve a new development or something of the sort. And so whenever that occurs, there has to be a good reason as to why. We need to make sure that it's not just political. It just, sometimes, especially when it comes to cities and towns, sometimes we hear, well, that's outside the city or the town. We like to use utilities as a way to coax people into becoming, get annexed into the town. It's really not great when you're trying to run a utility. Utilities, in my opinion, in my personal experience and professional experience, they're really not there to be a political tool. They're there to serve a community, and they're there to allow a community to grow and to prosper. So this part of the law was introduced just to make sure that if certain areas of communities aren't being served, that there is a legitimate reason, generally financial reason, as to why that part of the community is not being served. Next thing is water loss. Water loss is really interesting in that a lot of people get really mad about the way that, I don't want to use the word mad. A lot of people get annoyed by how this standard was set by our board. And I can't quite wrap my head around that, because here's the reason why. What the standard is that you need to sell at least 60% of your water. And I just can't imagine running a utility, running a company, and you're losing half your product and you're okay with that. right? And so that's pretty much what we're saying. You know, you take your water supplied, which is how much water you're pumping to your customers, the water sold, how much you're metering, that get your water loss. You divide that by your water supplied, that's your water loss percentage. So if I make 100 gallons of water, I sell 65, that means I lost 35 gallons. I lost 35% of my product. So in Tennessee, your water loss percentage cannot exceed 40%. How did we arise at that number? So years past, we were gathering all this data, and we found that the median water loss for utilities was somewhere a little bit less than a third, so 33-ish%. And so we bumped that up to 40. We said that this is a great place to start, and hopefully that'll start getting utilities to start doing more about their water loss. Right now, we have about 100 open cases out of 450 utilities, which I think at face value does seem somewhat alarming, right? You're walking around saying a quarter of all your utilities, they have these water loss problems. So there's two caveats to that. One, I'm not saying that a lot of utilities don't have a water loss problem. I think that the issue is a lot of them have metering problems. So there might not be water actually going into the ground. They're just dealing with very old meters that aren't registering everything correctly. We have seen multiple instances where utilities replace their meters and all of a sudden their water loss goes down. So I can't say for sure that all of these cases are we're losing actual water. The other thing is, I mean, obviously it can definitely come from poor infrastructure, right? Just water bleeding into the ground. That's never a good look. But then the other thing that we don't factor in is unavoidable water loss. When it comes to utility, this is things like flushing. Like you have to flush water lines every now and again. You know, I have to turn the fire hydrant on and just let it run for a little bit. We don't account for that because that's not water that's being sold to a customer. You know, one of our main drives as a board is to make sure that your utility is financially solvent. And if you're not selling that water, that's product that you have to waste to make sure you have a solid utility. Oftentimes, there are ways to improve your unavoidable water loss, and we're trying to guide utilities into making their utility better. So Ross, what happens whenever there's a water loss case? It's actually really easy. We ask them, without getting too far into it, we ask them to fill out this form to make sure that they do have a water loss problem. But then we say, send us your plan to correct your water loss. We don't say within 1 year, we want to see it at 25% because that would be bizarre. There's just no way that we'd be able to do that. So we say, just what is your plan? There are a few instances where they say, well, we never had a plan. We didn't think we had a water loss problem. And again, if you're losing half your water, I just can't imagine saying that we don't have a water loss problem. So we've been, like I said, this is a new way that we're dealing with water loss. I can't report any growth or any improvement yet, but I'm hoping that in several years we will have. I'll have some numbers to show y'all that the new way that we're doing it is working. So next is financial distress. This is probably the main thing that when people know our boards is what we're known for, the financial distress, designating a utility as financially distressed and trying to get them out of it. The one thing that most people know about it is the 2 years of loss. So in Tennessee, we are very unique in this, and I'm very proud of the way that Tennessee does this because it ensures the financial health of our communities, is we do not allow a utility to lose value 2 years in a row. All right, you're operationally, your revenues have to cover your expenses. You are not allowed to tap into your cash to pay salaries or, you know, any of those operating expenses. And I think that's something that Tennessee should hang its hat on, because if you look at communities where their utilities are struggling, and there's a few big communities, especially in recent news in other states that have had huge water infrastructure problems. And if you're from West Tennessee, you probably know which one that I'm talking about that comes to mind immediately. And if you were to go look at their books, because I pulled their last 5 years of audits, if they were being regulated by us, what's happening in that city right now would not have been happening. And I can guarantee that because they do not have the money to fix their infrastructure because they were never required to be operationally solvent. So you're not allowed to lose money for 2 years in a row. Deficit net position, your liabilities can't be higher than your assets. The law changed a little bit last year to also say your unrestricted net position, which if you don't know accounting, that's fine. This one's easy. It's pretty much how liquid you are. That can't be in a deficit. You can't default on debt. I think everyone knows that defaulting on debt is bad. 2 years of delinquent audits. Each one of these utilities has to be audited annually. If we're missing 2 years of audits for whatever reason, we kind of view that as where there's smoke, there's fire. There's probably a problem there, so we're calling you financially distressed. And then illicit transfer of funds. You can't send your water money to the general fund. You can't send your general fund money to the water fund. It needs to be self-contained in an enterprise fund to make sure that the customers are paying for the service that they're being provided. We have 77 open cases. Again, that seems like a lot. However, we'll say for those of you who might remember the exact number that I gave the last time I was presenting to y'all, I'm going to go ahead and tell you I don't remember. I just know that this is about 30 less. I think when I came in here last time, we had over 100 financial distress cases. I'm proud to report that that's gone down significantly. Not to mention 43 have implemented rate studies. We're seeing progress. If it takes 2 years of loss to get under our board, it takes 2 years of growth to get out from us. So I anticipate a decent amount of releases occurring next month at our meeting. So about to wrap up here with mergers in the Utility Revitalization Fund. So, you know, I talked about financial distress, and a lot of times the solution is when I'm looking at a utility that has 200 customers and the neighbor has a couple thousand customers, we understand economies of scale is going to benefit the smaller community. And so we look at mergers as a solution often to financial distress. The other instances where we can order mergers, and this hasn't occurred and we haven't ordered a merger yet, is severe managerial deficiencies. This was an update from the last year. Before we could, the UMRB, the Utility Management Review Board, could only order mergers in instances of financial distress. Well, now this board can order mergers of any, between any type of utilities. It doesn't have to be utility districts for financial distress or because of severe managerial deficiencies. Because there are instances where I see a utility is not being ran well, but their rates are sky high, just so they don't really come under our purview. And that's really not benefiting anyone in the community. So how do we do that? We tell them to get a feasibility study. A third party comes in, says yes or no, the merger is feasible. We have a public hearing in the area to hear whether the public thinks it's a good idea or a bad idea. I'm not excited to have to go do one of those because I don't really know what I'll be walking into, but we might have to be doing one here soon. Order for agreement. So we send an order saying you all need to come up with an agreement. The code says what needs to be in that agreement. And then if they don't agree on anything, we send this to Chancery Court. So anything that our board does is enforceable through Chancery Court, but it's also defensible through Chancery Court. So if someone doesn't like what we do, you know, the city could essentially sue us, and we go to Chancery to figure out what needs to be done. And then the merger is executed. So the last part here is the Utility Revitalization Fund. This is a really awesome tool that our board has access to. And let's see, did I say when it was? Yeah, 2022. So we can provide grants to subsidize mergers. These grants can be annuity payments, and these can be counted as operating revenue in determining statutory change in net position. I'm not going to get far into the counting on this one. But what that means in Tennessee, if you're a utility and you get a grant, you don't get to count that essentially as operating revenue, okay? So really, you get a $500,000 grant, you're going to buy a bunch of pipe with it. You're not getting that to go pay some salaries and stuff with it. So, you know, that's the difference between an operating expense and capital expense, right? So we say we need to take all your grants and capital contributions out because we want to know operationally, are you solvent? Well, funds from this fund that we put in as grants can be annuities that can be used as operating revenue because they are allowed to be used for things such as salaries or depreciation or anything that is considered an operating expense. So we got $2 million in that fund, non-recurring, in 2022. We made the first award to that of $500,000 to Plateau Utility District because they took over the city of Wartburg. Wartburg had a disaster of a sewer system. I mean, it was just failing left and right, and and financially it was just insolvent, and it was looking pretty bleak for this utility. Well, Plateau Utility District, without us forcing a merger, they decided, you know, this is the best thing for the community. We need to take over this utility, but they have some debt that we need help retiring, and if we could also help offset some of their expenses so we don't have to jump their rates immediately sky high to kind of roll them into it, because the customer shouldn't have to suffer too much because of the decisions of bad utility management. So we were able to award them $500,000. So we have $1.5 million remaining. This is an awesome tool that we have access to because most of the time when I'm talking to utilities about a merger, they always say, well, can you get me any money to do this? Because it's going to cost us a decent amount. And I say, well, if you know anything about utilities, $1.5 million really ain't a whole lot, but I'm gonna try to stretch it as far as we can. So in conclusion, We talked about how the T-Board is composed. We talked about administrative review cases, customer complaints, water loss, and financial distress. I invite all y'all, March 14th, 10 a.m. in the Volunteer Conference Center on the second floor is our next meeting. Y'all come on down. It's riveting stuff. It's a good time, so come on down if you'd like to. But that's all I have for you today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Ross, we appreciate the presentation and last year when Chairman Vaughn and I had kind of dreamed this up, you guys put it into motion and put everything together, and it looks like you've done a great job, and I'm glad to see that utilities are not being weaponized politically, which I think they were before. And so everything I've seen, I'm pretty excited about. Speaker Marsh, I saw your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And how often and how hard is it to make one utility take over another one?
So I will say that's not something that in years past that we've seen often. There's a few that come to mind. I will say it's very difficult. Normally it's a lot more easy. It was very difficult from the bad utility perspective. The bad utility was sitting there, that governing body said, we don't want to give this thing up. It's important for our community to own our utility. And, I understand communities having, the pride in the local government and what they own, sure. But when I was growing up, and even now, I didn't really care who owned the water whenever I made it come out of the faucet or where it went. I just wanted it to be cheap and safe. So we were dealing with local governments that were, I don't know, too proud to want to give up their utility. And so now that we have the T-Board, once they find out that they're not really going to have a choice in the matter and that we're operating solely for the benefit of the customer, not necessarily the benefit of the ownership of the local government, we found that they go a little bit smoother. So right now I can say they don't happen too often. We have 3 or 4 feasibility studies outstanding in which those could potentially result in mergers. But I will tell you, you go talk to the folks over in Wartburg, their sewer rate is going to be a lot lower than it will be now that they've merged with Plateau Utility District. And I think that's what the people focused on.
Speaker Marsh.
And you and I have been working on one in my district, and I think the one that's doing bad, they don't want to keep it. They would like to give it up.
Right.
But the one that's doing great, they really don't know if they want them because they're going to have to spend so much money to bring them up to where they need to be. But if you make them do that, what will happen to the rate in the area that has
Sure.
bad utility?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I will say that our board will never endorse a decision, especially when it comes to a merger, that is going to negatively affect the utility that was doing good to begin with. So if we're looking at that merger and they say, yeah, we'll take them over, but my current customers, their rates are going to have to go up 10, 15%. I'll say, well, this is a no-go. Luckily in Tennessee, that's not a requirement because you're allowed to have separate rates based on things like geographical location. So, you can have good utility saying this is good utilities rates. We take over bad utility, and now bad utility has their own rate structure. At the local level, they're allowed to keep their own books. So now what we've done is we've just consolidated the management of the utility. And even though the books can be kept somewhat separate, they can also be combined. In total, a lot of times what you see in an audit is the front of the audit, it has a combined fund, and then later on the detailed schedules, you'll see them separated. So I say all that to say, we will never endorse a decision where the good utility is affected negatively. I want to see a net neutral or a benefit to the good utility and a benefit to the bad utility, if that would be something that we would pursue. And then I put my professional guarantee on that.
Representative Burkhart, did you have a question? Okay. Chairman Vaughn, you recognized.
Thanks, Chairman Boyd. And for those of you who have not been here to kind of understand the origins of this, this is one of those, Chairman Boyd talked about nerding out. I nerd out about this because I realized whenever the speaker tasked me with being the chairman of Commerce that when I understood that utilities fell underneath us, frankly, I realized my ignorance with regards to how things operated and what our jurisdiction was with regards to them. And so we embarked, and bless y'all's heart, everybody hung in as well as they could on a kind of a crash course in utility management and the scope of our authority within those boundaries. Did it over several meetings, several hearings, and one of the things that came out of it was this, and Chairman Boyd was the first to recognize it, the duality of what we had dealing with basically underground water and sewer systems and the governance of it. So whenever I see this, it seems like a lot of the nooks and crannies where problems could go and hide have been eliminated through this, because y'all gave a lot of thoughtful review of, and I'm sure Ross, part of it was due to your experience of, man, if I had a crack at this legislation again, or this enacting legislation, I'd make sure we could do this. And so hopefully the winner at the end of this day are the consumers themselves, and that we have somewhat removed some bureaucratic obstacles and hiding places that problems can go to stay and continue to fester. And I appreciate your help and Chairman Boyd's for tackling this. It was one of those deals to where we found out something that we didn't know. We thought about it a little while and thought there might be a better way, and it's come to fruition, and I'm glad to hear it's working. I'm one of those people who might show up at that meeting one day.
Come on down.
But anyway, I think you can bruise yourself patting yourself on the back there, because that's a good call, Chairman Boyd, for your leadership effort and getting us across the finish line. Because I think our customers, and that's one of those things, we can't introduce a lot of competition in the marketplace in utilities. And so if we can be a customer-focused organization where we keep the customers in the forefront of all our decision making, then it's got to be better than it was. And so good job on you. And I'm tickled for what small part we played in this, because I think the customers are getting better service today because of it.
Thank you.
Representative Thompson, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trying to get my head around water loss. It sounds a little strange, but now when you say water supplied, is that water that has been treated and ready to go to the customer, to the ratepayer?
So there's two types of water supplied. Well, as elementary as to make this, there's pretty much two types. We have utilities in Tennessee that produce their own water. So, they may suck it out of the river, treat it, send it to customers. You also have a lot of utilities that are just middlemen. And so they might buy water from the neighboring city, pump it to their own system, and then sell that. So water supplied is just wherever it comes from their master meter, the utility's master meter, and goes to a customer.
Okay.
Representative, you recognize.
Yeah. So it is water that has been treated and ready to go to the ratepayer. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. But it has nothing to do with the availability of the water supply.
Correct.
Okay. And it is considered lost if it goes to what it's intended to do, go to the user?
Yeah, because it's
Okay.
it's not making any revenue. So if we're looking at this from a revenue perspective. So
Oh,
they may have
okay.
paid, let's say they paid, $2 a gallon to make this water. And let's say a utility lost 2 million gallons. They lost $2 million, right? Because they paid 2 million to treat it, and all they did was pump it into the ground. So it's not lost in the sense that it's disappeared. It's just lost because it wasn't converted into what it was supposed to be, which is revenue for the
Okay.
utility.
Okay. Thank you. I'm beginning to understand.
Sure.
Speaker Johnson, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is along the same lines as Representative Thompson. Are the customers under the utilities water system required to have a meter?
So yeah, there aren't. Okay, here's what I'll say to that is I don't think that there is a statutory requirement. Keep in mind, I ain't an attorney, y'all, so I'm not familiar with every aspect of the law. I don't think there's a statutory requirement that says you have to meter every single one of your customers. But to my knowledge, there was the last case of a utility that didn't have meters was in the late 2010s. And so that was the last utility under us that didn't have meters. So I don't think there's a statutory requirement that says so. I just don't think there's any utilities out there that don't have meters right now for water.
So for instance, if, if there's a privately owned water system that sells to a utility district and they do not have meters, there's nothing in statute that says,
No, but a lot of utilities have local policies. I would say the majority of utilities, I can't think of one that wouldn't fit this, have a local policy to say every customer must be metered. And again, I may be speaking out of my wheelhouse here, and if an attorney has a different opinion that knows of the law where it says you have to have meters, I'm more than happy to say that I'm wrong. But to my knowledge, no, there is no state statute for that instance. And I mean, I'm just not aware of one.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ross, I do have a question. I know we're on water loss here. Is that still just a self-reporting number, or is there some way for y'all to really audit how much water they're losing?
So it's still a self-reporting thing. What happens is our board, we have what's called the annual information report that utilities have to fill out annually. And we ask them, 2 easy questions, which is how much water do you supply? How much water did you sell? And that's how we derive our number. It used to be part of a massive Excel sheet that was very confusing for the people to try to put together. So we simplified it, and I believe that we've gotten better results. So it's still self-reporting. As far as us auditing the information, that would, to be honest, we're just not staffed to be able to do that for the 450 utilities in Tennessee. That would just be extremely difficult. Now, what I will say we do is in instances where there are water loss, they send us the documents that show what their water loss is. So we do somewhat audit it, but we don't go travel there to say, show us your records right now.
Well, I guess what I was wondering, is there not a way to say, okay, we filtered this much water, or we bought this much water off our neighboring utility, and our meters show that we sold this much, and they could show it that way? It just seems like in the past there have been some smaller utilities that maybe would say we lost 50%, and you go 50, it needs to be lower than 30, and they go, oh, I'm sorry, we meant 30. I mean, it seems like it kind of is lending itself or giving them the opportunity to do that.
Well, so without singling any utilities out, there are instances in which we've seen that occur, and we're able to get involved in other ways with those utilities because there's no, if one year your water loss was 60 and then in the next year it was 30, we track it year to year. So if we see large spikes in that look like it's, we're not maybe getting the correct information, we have been able to get in there. So we kind of look for those red flags, but again, we haven't been able to audit every single one.
Okay. Members, any other questions for Ross? Ross, thank you for this update. And I'm not just saying this because it was my bill, but I think this was one of the best things we did last year. And I think that Tennesseans and the ratepayers down the road, this is going to pay a huge dividend for them. And they're the real winners here. Thank you, Ross.
All right,
appreciate
thank
it. Members are going back into session. And without objection, this meeting is adjourned.